We're going back to the old Double Deuce, the crew of Apollo 22, aka Jamestown 2, and its crew of 3 that have, all for very different reasons, never returned to the moon. Hey guys, Pete here. This will be my breakdown for All Mankind Season 2, Episode 4. The episode is titled Pathfinder, which is after NASA's Next Generation Space Shuttle, which was teased on Twitter about a week ago. As a warning, this video will contain spoilers if you haven't watched Episode 4 yet. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. So at the Baldwin house at breakfast, we see that Karen did pick up on the fact that Ed hasn't been back to the moon because he made a promise to himself never to leave her and then Kelly alone again. Karen runs through the options and lands on Pathfinder, a test pilot's dream. And you gotta give it to her, she knows her husband. He's reluctant, taken by surprise, but she's right and she's insistent. It's not until later when he looks at the Pathfinder model he has in his office that we see him light up and know he's going back to space. After that, we find Gordo trying out his new spacesuit, and we see that he's still anxious about this whole process. After they put his helmet on, he freaks out, and we see that he's out of it, and his vision starts to look a little bit distorted. He doesn't respond to the texts when they talk to him, and ultimately he takes off, and we see him in the bathroom where he breaks down. It's clear that what happened during the Apollo 22 mission is still weighing heavily on his mind. At the outpost, Ed tells Dani and Gordo about his return after he congratulates them on doing a great job on their proficiency test. They laugh and joke around, but everyone is happy he made this decision. The whole crew is going back, if not together, and then Ed notices that something is off with Gordo. He tells them what happened with the helmet, assures them that he didn't tell anybody else about it, and they're supportive. There's concern, but it looks like at least right now they think that Gordo can pull it off, that he can pull himself together, and things will go differently this time. Dani's also got something on her mind, and she tells them that she has to go visit Clayton's sister, and she's just not looking forward to it. She does go there and it's tense. They don't have a good relationship. There's definitely tension between these two. And through their conversation, we begin to understand why. Dani's doing her best to make peace. That's why she's there. And the sister is just not open to it. She tells her that she knows what really happened on the moon and basically says that Dani's allowed NASA to use her, make her a laughingstock, and that she put up with it in order to save a white man's career. Dani makes the distinction here that this was a member of her crew, her friend, a good man, and that his skin color didn't really have anything to do with it at the time. And from there, things get personal. The sister says that Dani is the one who filled Clay's head with all that patriotic crap, and that experience, which he went through for nothing in the sister's opinion, is the reason why he's no longer with them. And what's more, when she hears that Dani's going back to the moon, the sister points out the fact that, hey, look, you're spending all this money to go up there and do that when there's things that are more important. Like if there was more money in the VA, maybe Clayton would still be there. And it's a pretty well-reasoned argument on both sides that leaves an impression on Dani. Neither person is wrong from their own point of view, and that makes it really resonate on an emotional level. The scene works, and it hits pretty hard, and is up there with Ed's meltdown in the last episode. Ed's trying to get out of his office because it's his last day, and Dani comes in to see him. She's decided that she wants a command slot, and she's counting on the connection they have to make this happen. This clearly makes Ed uncomfortable, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with it. He just wants to get out of the office, but she makes a good case for herself, and she stands her ground. He won't commit at this moment, but he's definitely thinking about it, and when he goes into the meeting and finds out that the Soviets have agreed to the handshake in space plan, it works out pretty well for him. Now, Paine is not into the idea at all. He's hoping for somebody else, someone he can champion to the president, and he's concerned about what happened in Apollo 22. And there might be more going on there, but he doesn't really get a chance to argue because everyone else that's there that's worked with Dani is immediately on board with what Ed's talking about. There's a consensus that she's the right choice. And another thing that's working to her advantage is that one of the main reasons they didn't want to do this mission with the Soviets is because they didn't want to let them see their new technology. They didn't want them to see the space shuttle. Ellen had brought up the idea that they could use one of the Apollo spacecraft to avoid this. And of course, that's where Dani's experience is. And Bradford also makes a great point that the Soviets have always been using the US's troubled history with race against them. And he makes it clear that he's on board for this. He wants to see it happen. And if Paine has any problems taking this to the president, then he'll get on the phone with the Secretary of Defense, who will back him up. In the end, it works out. But Paine does come and visit Ed at his office, basically calling him out for blindsiding him before he leaves his post. The next time we see him, we see Ed getting ready for his first day back as an astronaut. It's clear that he's in his element. He's in a good mood, eating his literal Wheaties. He goes out and decides that he's going to drive his Corvette to work, and of course that breaks down as soon as he gets it out of the garage. This was definitely a funny scene to watch. It was a nice montage of him getting ready. It kind of got you pumped up for the whole idea, and then you couldn't help but laugh when you see it break down. He's on his way to meet with Piscotti and Sally Ride. They're his crew. We saw him tell this to Piscotti earlier after he gave him a hat to put on to cover his red hair and decided that that would work. Of course, in our timeline, Sally Ride was the first American woman in space. He takes them to see Pathfinder for the first time, and the show manages to put together a pretty awesome reveal here. They cut the scenes of them going to see the new shuttle, with Danielle going to look at her ship. It's the past and the future right there. And the way they cut things together, it's really uplifting, and you can't help but be kind of awed when you see them arrive at their ships. It's one of those things that this show does really well. We hear Ed talking to Piscotti and Ride, and he tells them why they're there, gives them a little bit of a pep talk, and the whole thing ends with him saying, "Let's go make history." And I've watched this sequence several times while writing this script, and it hit me every single time. At the outpost, we catch up with Gordo watching Nikolai Volkov versus Sergeant Slaughter on the TV. He's getting ready to go meet Ed, having his lunch, and when he looks at his soda, he sees that there's ants all over it, and it looks like he's hallucinating. He definitely thinks he's hallucinating. And then we get clued into what's really going on when Karen walks over and sprays them with ant spray, which felt pretty 80s. I can't imagine someone spraying that, just holding up the menu to keep it off the food and out of everyone's face at the bar. When he does meet Ed, he tells him about it and he freaks out. He tells him the story about his father, how tough the guy was, all the things that he'd been through, and about seeing him laying flat on his back on his bed in the hospital with cancer and seeing so much fear in his eyes, seeing him scared for the first time, and how he couldn't take seeing that. He says maybe the fear was with him all along, but he was too weak to fight against it anymore at that point. And that's fairly revealing with what's going on inside Gordo's head. And really, Ed doesn't know what to do with it. He really doesn't know how to react in a way that's useful. So he takes the harsher route and tells him to be a man. Basically, forget about that. You're not hallucinating. The real problem here is that you're being weak. You're an astronaut. You willingly sit on top of a rocket that's made of flammable fuel. So be a man already. And it's the kind of scene that makes you wonder, like, what are they trying to say here? Is Gordo sick? We don't really know. What really did happen with Gordo on the moon? We do know that he went to see a therapist when he came back. But we really don't know if this was just stress related or if there was more to it. So I'm curious because the Gordo stuff has been entertaining, but he also has all the makings of a tragic character here. I mean, if nothing else, we see that he's got PTSD from what happened the last time he went to the moon. So I'm curious to see where they're taking this character. He pulls himself together and they each pilot their own jet. And in the process, Ed decides that he wants to make him feel better, I guess. So he initiates what is essentially a drill of them pretending that they're in a dogfight. Gordo is able to rise to the occasion. He's able to chase Ed down, get him in a simulated target lock, and this seems to make him feel better. But at the same time, one of Ed's engines catches on fire and he has to eject from the plane. It was kind of a weird turn. I'm not really sure where that's going. It turns out to be a cool little cliffhanger that makes you wonder, and I will come back to this again in a minute. So some other things that were going on in the episode, beyond just following the Apollo 22 astronauts, we do also get some time with Ellen. She goes to see Paine about the Mars mission being put on the back burner. And he does a pretty good job of explaining the politics of things to her. He tells her how he did a favor that went against NASA's short-term interests. As a way to get that same politician he helped introduce the bill that allows NASA to license their tech to private firms. This is an important divergence, as I mentioned in my timeline video, and he stresses how that's going to allow them to be self-funded within 10 years, and thus free them up from the whims of Congress. We learn that he's actually passionate about space, and he says that people hate politicians, but they're the ones that make all of this possible. It definitely adds some depth to the character, but it's also worth noting that he emphasized that they need a Republican president to win in the next election cycle to keep him in his place. It's also noticeable that he drives home this idea that the trick is not to lose track of who you really are, considering Ellen's situation. We do see her at home, where Larry encourages her to open all the mail that she missed while she was on the moon. In that, we finally find out where Pam went after the end of season 1. She's teaching writing in Austin, and she sent a book of poetry, asking if Ellen can guess which poem is about her. Seems like this opens the door to a return for Pam, and it brings up a question about a connection with our timeline. I mentioned Sally Ride earlier as a part of Ed's Pathfinder crew, and the fact that she was the first woman that the US sent to space. She's also recognized as the first LGBT person in space, but it wasn't something that was known about until after her death. Like Ellen, she was married to a man in the space program, an astronaut though, but her real-life partner turned out to be a woman that she spent 27 years of her life with. She kept her personal life private, and the relationship wasn't acknowledged until after she passed away. This is definitely something to keep in mind when we think about where Ellen's story might be going. We also saw Tracy taking off, going back for 6 months on the moon. They have a camera on her inside of Discovery, and she does an interview as they're getting ready to launch, which Gordo watched. Piscotti's friend called him out about being too much of a pushover with Ed, and that might be something that comes back later. He definitely is kind of awestruck whenever he interacts with Ed, and I can't imagine that they haven't put that in there for a reason. Another thing that was kind of strange was the interactions with Dani and Karen. It seems like maybe they're setting up for him to have a crush on her. I can't imagine it going much further than that, but he was really excited that she knew about wrestling, and then later we see her outside smoking weed, and he asked to take a hit. So that connects them in a way that doesn't necessarily seem random. They're setting something up there, but I'm not sure what it is yet. Some interesting stuff, kind of fascinating how all of these 3 main characters who spent all that time together on the moon, how things played out over the last 9 years for them, seeing where they're at right now. In light of that, I think it makes sense for Dani to get her own mission. It's certainly a ripple effect, but it's one that makes sense based on what's happened in this timeline. I mentioned Sally Ride was the first woman in 1983, the same year that we're in the alternate timeline. That's also when the first African American was sent to space. And then we got the first black commander in 1989. So things are moving up in a natural pace here. I think this episode was on par with what we've seen so far in season 2. I thought the performances were really great here, and there were some really strong sequences that get me hyped up about seeing where things go towards the end of the season. We've got Ed in the ocean, Gordo continuing to struggle, and I did like the insights into the politics of keeping things moving with the space program. By the time we get to season 3, NASA might be financially autonomous, which could definitely lead to more aggressive exploration, and I like this route better than the advancement of private sector corporations taking things over in our own timeline. Also, Molly was convinced to take over Ed's position in the Astronaut Office after he helped her realize that she'd be able to assign herself to Pathfinder down the road. There could definitely be consequences for Ed's dogfight. Could it be enough to mess up his ride on Pathfinder? Like I said, he lost a plane. That wouldn't probably be a big deal, except for he was doing something he wasn't supposed to, so he is actually responsible for what happened. And the fact that he's in the water, it's going to make for a rescue effort, and none of that had to happen. So we'll have to wait and see what it leads to. Also with Gordo, we talked about things from his perspective, but he's only there because Ed thought it was the best way to bring him out of his funk. Paine brought this up whenever he came to his office and called him out, and there's a definite possibility that this wasn't the right idea. Seeing him struggle trying to deal with what Gordo's going through, it doesn't really look great at this point. There was a mention of things escalating in Panama. The US launched a military rescue of the 4 hostages there, and there's potential for things heating up in the Cold War. We'll see where that goes in light of last week's decision to get guns on the moon. And I think that's a good place to leave things. So let me know in the comments what you thought about this episode, where you think things are going, what was your favorite scene, and what are you hoping to see next time. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you soon.